In this video, I am going to be completely transforming this bathroom. So let me just show you around the bathroom in its current state. Now, while there's nothing particularly wrong with the bathroom, it could definitely do with the makeover. So that's what we're going to do. I hope you enjoy the video tutorial.
This is the main bathroom in my client's home, and we're going to be doing a full makeover in this space. The most exciting part about this makeover is that I'm going to be trying out a new product, Microcement. Well, it's been around for a little while, but it's new in my world and I've never used this product before, and I'm super excited to see how it goes. It's going to be a learning curve for me and for you, and I'm going to take you on the journey with me as we transform this bathroom using Microcements. First things first is I need to remove all the original features of the bathroom. So we're going to be taking out this original shower screen, and I'm also going to be taking out the vanity and the mirror so that we've got a blank slate to work with. I'm then going to be using the Microcement to transform the look and feel of this space. This house is in the coast, and so my client decided that she wanted to go with the cream color because the color of the cream Microcement and the smear blend of the look and feel of the design made her feel like she was at the beach and it looked like sand. So that's what we're going to try and create, a beautiful, stunning bathroom that's got that coastal feel that makes you feel like you're heading to the beach in sand. There's a couple of things that I'm not really sure how I'm going to work around them yet. First things first is that there's actually two different bases. So we've got tiles in some parts and then we've got plaster in the other parts. Now with the Microcement, what this means is we need a different base for each of those components because one of them is abrasive and one of them is not abrasive. And we're going to need to make sure that we've got the absorbency right with the Microcement. So I'm going to use two different components, but I'm not sure how I'm going to blend it nicely between the tiles and the plaster and make it look like it's seamless. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of research into that to see how we're going to blend the tiles into the plaster walls. One of the amazing things about this Microcement product is that you don't actually need to have anything removed. So it goes straight over the top of everything, which makes it so much easier to renovate than ripping out all of the tiles and retiling everything. But I do still love a good full bathroom reno. However, this is going to be a more budget option and it's going to be interesting to see how it turns out. So it's time for me to stop talking and let's dive into this makeover tutorial.
To start off with, I had to remove the old shower screen. So I simply undid all of the screws, took the door off, and then started taking apart the frame. There's typically a few screws on top, and then you may also need to go along and cut through all of the silicone like I did to break the seal and enable it to be removed. Once the shower screen was removed, it was time to take apart the vanity. So I just took out the basin and then took off the doors to make it a little bit lighter for me to carry out. Then I unscrewed it from the wall and removed this whole vanity in one piece. And then this is how the bathroom was looking.
So my plans in this space have now completely changed. I initially said that I wasn't sure how I was going to blend the Microcement with the tiles and the wall because they're two different thicknesses, and then I was going to have to try and create almost like a ramp so that the Microcement would blend seamlessly between these two different levels. Now, it isn't going to have that really professional luxury feel about it that I wanted it to because you're going to be able to see those two different levels no matter what I do. So what I've decided that I'm going to have to do is remove the tiles. I'm not going to be removing all of the tiles. The floor is all one level. So the floor is just going to have the Microcement go over the top of the tiles. The same with around the bath. The actual framing around the bath that's got tiles on it, that's all one level, and that is fine to stay like that because we're going to not see any differences with that when it comes to the Microcement. So the main thing that we need to do here is take all of the tiles off the walls. So I'm just going to take the tiles off the shower and then the tiles off around the bath. And then there's a little bit of a lip on the side of the walls of the other walls that's going to come off as well. Now, I was initially thinking the easiest way to do this was just going to be to cut the sheets out, put some new plaster in and remove this. But unfortunately, this is also cement sheeting, which means it's not going to be simple to just cut this off the wall and then put some new plaster in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chip all of these tiles off. You'll be able to see up here that we just had a go at trying to start chipping them off. and see what it was going to come out like. And I'm going to chip those off, and then I'm going to have to sand it or grind it down so that I can remove some of that tile glue, so I've got a nice smooth consistency that I can put the micro cement over. But as with renovations, everything's always changing and evolving. Your plan is never going to be what you actually do in the end. Usually something always goes wrong or something changes, and you've got to be very adaptable when you're doing any kind of renovation. And this here is my adaptation.
So I just used the bolster and my hammer to go along and tap down behind the tiles and then chip them all off. Now, while it does look fairly fast in the video, this was actually a very slow process. So I had to go through and hit each tile individually one by one. The process stays the same around where the plumbing fittings are. So you're going to hit around down behind the plumbing fittings. You'll also notice that I put a hole in the wall, so I'm going to have to repair that hole.
So I've now removed all of the tiles off the walls, but we've still got a little bit of glue on the walls, and I'm just going to go through and remove all of that glue. I'm then going to give the wall a sand down because I want to make sure that there's no bits that are hanging off the walls. And then lastly, what I'm going to do is go through and put a top coat of plaster on just to level out all of these holes. The waterproofer is going to need to come in and do the waterproofing in the room because I'm not qualified as a waterproofer and I'm not going to do the waterproofing. I have in the past had to go with that, but I think it's better if I just get tradespeople in to do the waterproofing. So the tradespeople are going to come in and do the waterproofing, and I'm just going to sand the walls down, put a top coat of plaster on, and then they'll get it all ready and waterproof it before I then can move on to the micro cement.
To remove the chunky parts of the tile glue, I just used a sharp scraper. So I just had the scraper and I used the hammer to hit down behind the scraper and push off that tile glue that's left. Once that was all done, I just cleaned it all up and left it for the waterproofer to come in and level all the surface and apply the waterproofing.
The bathroom makeover is coming along really nicely. I've now done all of the demo work and everything's been torn out. The plumber has come in and fitted off all of the fittings ready to go for the micro cementing, and we've got the waterproofer in who's done all of the waterproofing. I have previously done some waterproofing, but in the end I've just decided that waterproofing is much better off to outsource. So I've had someone come in and do all of the waterproofing in this space, and now all I need to do is get the micro cement onto the walls and the floor. So basically everything in this space is going to be micro cemented except for the ceiling. So we're going to do all of the walls, the floor, and around the bathtub. And I'm really excited to see how this is going to turn out. I've actually seen so many pictures and videos of micro cementing, and I'm super excited to get to try it out for myself and see the process come to life. This piece right here is actually the vanity that's going to be going in after the micro cementing is done. It's going to have to move out of the way while I do all of the micro cement, but then the plumber is going to come in and put the vanity in, fit off the vanity. Also, the shower screen is going to get installed once the micro cementing is all done. And then we're going to be adding some beautiful brass hardware, including a nice shower head and some new tapware that's going to really finish off this space perfectly. So let's get into the work and actually start micro cementing this bathroom.
I went around and applied the masking tape to the ceiling and also the window frames.
Okay, so we're going to get started with the micro cementing process, and the first step is going to be to apply the primer. The primer I'm going to be applying everywhere, so all over the plaster walls, all over the top of the waterproofing, and I'm just going to be applying the primer with a paintbrush and a mini roller and just rolling that all over the wall.
The primer is a very thin liquid, so I just poured it into the roller tray and then grabbed my paintbrush to do the corners and around the plumbing fittings, and then grabbed the mini roller to do everything else. The primer was actually super easy to apply. I just went along and rolled this all over the entire wall. The only tricky part was that I forgot to bring my stepladder, so I just borrowed one of the outdoor chairs. This is not advisable because it's definitely not the safest way to get up to the ceiling, but it did in a pinch. Then I just repeated the process over everything. So this same primer was able to go over the top of the waterproofer, over the plaster, and over the bare cement sheet board. So it literally just went over the top of everything, and I just rolled it onto the wall. The primer is very fast drying, so once I finished painting it on, I only needed to give it 30 minutes to dry.
So next step in the micro cementing process, now that the primer is all on and dry, is to apply the Smart base. Now the Smart base is going to take 6 to 8 hours to dry. So I need to just apply this, and then I'm going to leave it overnight before I can then go on and sand in between the layers and put the second coat of the base on, because I actually need to trowel on 2 layers of this base coat. So I'm just going to do 1 layer first, go in and trowel it all, and then let it dry overnight.
With the micro cement kit, you're going to get a trowel and a roller, and the instructions state that the process should be that you roll the base coat onto the wall and then use the trowel to smooth it out, but I decided to go against the grain a little bit. You'll see here that I'm now troweling on the base coat. This is actually a very similar process to troweling plaster if you've ever done any troweling of plaster, but basically you want to try and work in a semicircle. So as you put the micro cement on, you do want to go over it in a semicircle direction to get the smoothest top layer you can. Although in the corners and up against the side of the bath, I did prefer to use one of the edges of the trowel and get it as close and smooth as I could right up against that edge, using the edge of the trowel, either the long edge or the short edge, whichever one fit best in the space. In all honesty, the application process did take a little bit to get used to. So this first wall that I applied with the trowel and I smoothed out the micro cement base onto did take a lot longer than the rest of the walls. As I started to get used to the process, it did get a little bit easier and a little bit faster. And so as I completed each of the walls, I did improve the technique and the speed of which I was doing it each time. But if you're doing this troweling and applying this micro cement for the first time and you've never done anything similar, just be aware that it will take you a little bit of time to get used to, and it is going to be quite a slow process. For me, I found that it took me around about an hour once I'd kind of got the hang of it for each wall to get that really nice smooth finish and smooth application over the whole wall. So because I was doing 4 walls and the floor, each layer took me approximately 5 hours, sometimes up to about 6 hours to apply. Once I had been through and applied the base coat on all of the walls, I needed to go through and use the jointer product in the joins between all of the tiles. Now, because the floor and around the bath, I had left the tiles and the waterproofer had just gone over the original tiles, I needed to go around and fill all of those little holes so that there's no grooves in between the tiles when I apply the micro cement, and it's all nice and flat. So I filled all of the joins in the shower, and then I realized I should go through and remove all of the masking tape from the ceiling before I go around and apply the jointer in the floor so that I don't have any chances of stepping on any of these lines after I've applied it. It's recommended to remove the masking tape after each layer of the micro cement so that the micro cement doesn't go hard and then you have problems removing the tape. If it goes hard, you might find that you can't remove the tape, so make sure you remove it in between each layer.
Because I'm micro cementing the whole bathroom, it is quite a fair bit of work rather than doing a small space like if you were just going over the top of the tiles in just the shower area, or if you're doing a kitchen splashback or something like that, it's going to be a much smaller space. But I have a huge amount of area to cover with the trowel and the actual product. So we're going in today for the second layer of the Smart base. So I'm going to be doing the exact same thing. First off, I need to go in and give it a really good sand in between the layers to smooth out any imperfections. Now the Smart base is really quite firm. It has dried very firm and it's going to need quite a fair bit of pressure to be able to sand that off. So I am going to need to use a really heavy grit sandpaper. So I'm going to be using a 40 grit sandpaper to sand off the base and try and smooth out any rough patches in the walls. So I'm going to go in and sand everything first. Then once the sanding's done, I'm going to trowel on a second layer of this Smart base.
Now in the micro cement kit, you're given a hand sander with some 40 grit sandpaper that you can use to go around with your hand and sand in between each layer. But because I have a plaster sander and it is on like a roller pole, it's much faster for me to go through overall and sand it down. So I started off with going through and sanding down all of the wall with this plaster sander with a 40 grit sandpaper. And then I grabbed out my small orbital sander and went through and sanded any of those really hard bits or where it was a little bit thicker with the power of the battery, because it just made it that little bit faster for me. If you're going to be doing this all by hand with the hand sander, I would say there's two things you really need to focus on. The first one is make sure you get it as smooth as possible when you're doing the application, because the more that you have to sand off because you've got an uneven surface, the longer it's going to take you, especially when sanding by hand. And the second thing is that you want to try and do this in a big smooth motion to try and get as much of it done at the same time as possible. But my best recommendation would be to either use an orbital sander or a larger sanding disc to try and cover a larger area at once, such as the plaster sander that I used. So now you'll be able to see that I am troweling on the second layer of the base coat. Now the base coat is a little bit more of a grainy consistency than the top coat, which you'll be able to see once I start applying the top coat. But the second layer of the base coat did go on easier than the first layer because it had something to grip to with the layer underneath, as opposed to the plaster wall, which was really quite smooth and a little bit harder to get it to stick to the surface. Even though I had the primer on the wall, I did find that applying the second layer of the base coat was much easier and a little bit faster than the first. Once I was finished with the second layer on the four walls, I then needed to apply the first layer around the bath, and so along the lip of the bath and on the floor. Now, around the bath was definitely the hardest part to do because I had to try and get it so it was a little bit thicker around the edge of the bath so I could sand it smooth into like a curved edge. So I did need to try and put a little bit too much on that corner there. Then it was time to do the floor. Now, I did actually find the floor a little bit harder to apply the micro cement on because you didn't have that vertical angle helping you. So when I was applying it and I was smoothing it out in the circles, I did need to go over it a couple of extra times on the floor. And I also needed to make sure that there wasn't going to be any lumps in it or anything that was on the floor. So before I did apply the first layer on the floor, I went through with a vacuum and I vacuumed it really deeply so that I could make sure there was no dust or anything that was going to get in my micro cement. So I let the first layer dry overnight on the floor and the second layer on the walls, and then I came in the next day, which I did a little bit of a shorter day because I just sanded off the second coat of the walls ready for the top coat, and I applied the second coat on the edge of the bath and on the floor. As I mentioned, where the tiles were, I had to apply the jointer product, which requires 24 hours to dry. So that meant that this part of it was going to take an extra day, which is why I then came back in on a different day to do the second coat of the base coat on the floor, so that then the whole room was at the same level and the same spot ready for me to apply the first layer of the top coat all together. And in case you're following along in a timeline over how long this project is taking me, I'm currently up to day 5, which is a bit of a shorter day, heading into day 6. So I did 2 days of demo work. I then did the primer and the first coat on the walls and the jointer on the floor. I came back and I did the second coat on the walls and the first coat on the floor. Then I came back on the 5th day to do the second coat on the floor. And now here we are on day 6, where I'm going and sanding all of the second coat of the base coat around the bath and the floor before I do the first layer of the micro cement.
Okay, so the 2 base layers are now complete, and it's time to put the actual micro cement, or what they call the Smart Liso layer, on. Now, the Smart Liso is the top layer of the micro cement, so the same is going to apply. I do need to put that on, and I'm going to trowel all of that on. Then I need to let this dry for at least 4 hours before I can do a fine sand in between each layer. So I am actually going to do the same, let it dry overnight, because it does take me quite a long time to trowel on the whole layer in that bathroom. So I'm going to do 1 layer of the Smart Liso, and then I'm going to let it dry overnight. Then I'm going to apply the second layer of the Smart Liso the next day, but this is going to give me the best result, and making sure that I sand it smooth in between each layer.
So as I mentioned, I reapply the masking tape each day because it's just so much easier to remove the masking tape each day at the end of the day while that layer is still wet, rather than let it dry and try and remove the masking tape afterwards. So I just reapply the masking tape each day, and I'm now troweling on that first layer of that Smart Liso micro cement. When you do this, you'll be able to see, or you'd be able to notice that it is a thinner consistency and it's a very smooth finish. So it's almost like silk or like a glassy kind of finish, as opposed to the base layer, which is a bit more sandy. So this is a bit more like plaster top coat, if you've ever worked with plaster top coat, whereas the base coat is that more sandy, grainy consistency. It's actually a little bit different than what I was expecting it to be, because when I had in my mind micro cement, I actually kind of assumed that the top layer was going to be more that sort of sandy consistency of what the base layer was, but it ended up being a lot smoother than I thought it was going to be, which is actually really good for certain reasons. The first one being it's a lot less rough on your feet on the floor because it's a much smoother consistency. The second one being is that this base coat was very coarse. So when I was doing the sanding, I would often cut up my knuckles or cut my skin on my hands, which is not a common thing that's going to happen because you're not likely to be going to be moving fast across this micro cement. But it was something that did happen, and I think like maybe for kids, if you're going to be using the bathroom, it wouldn't be very nice for that base layer because it is that quite rough consistency. So this smooth top coat does really make it a lot more friendly when it comes to your skin and the potential for, you know, cutting yourself on the surface. But it's funny because I did actually really love the look of the base coat with the grainy texture and how it gave the overall feel of the room, as it was that really sandy sort of finish. So the same applied with the drain in the shower. I taped up over the top of the drain and applied the micro cement around that, and then immediately removed the tape every layer that I put on. I worked my way around the room with each layer, doing the walls, then around the bath, then in the shower, and then along the floor, backing myself out the door. Now the micro cement Smart Liso top layer was a fair bit softer than what the base layer was. So I didn't want to use a 40 grit sandpaper on this. So I actually swapped over to a 120 grit to start off with, and then would move on to a 240 grit to get a really smooth finish between each layer of this. Also, just remembering to remove the masking tape each day at the end of the day, and then apply new masking tape before you do each layer. Now, once again, the correct application for this, according to the instructions of the product, is to apply with the roller first. So you're going to roll on the micro cement and then just smooth it out with the trowel. So I'm going against the grain a little bit by just applying it with the trowel. But those recommendations are to apply it with the roller and then smooth it out with the trowel if you're following the product recommendations.
Okay, so I'm up to the final layer of the micro cementing process. And so for this layer, I've got the Smart Varnish and also the Smart Booster. So I need to tip the Smart Booster into the Smart Varnish and then mix that and let it sit for 10 minutes before I start applying it onto the wall. And then I'm just going to paint this on. Now, I selected the matte finish, but you can get a couple of different varieties. So it really depends on the overall finish that you're looking for. But I've got the matte finish that I'm going to be using in this bathroom.
So I just tipped the booster straight into the varnish, gave it a nice good shake, and then let it sit for 10 minutes. You need to do this with each container of the varnish, but I just mixed up the containers as I needed them so that they weren't left sitting for too long. For this, I just painted it on similar to what I did with the primer. So I just used the paintbrush to cut in around the edges and then got the roller and simply just rolled a layer of this over all of the walls and around the bath and then all over the floor. So I did the walls first and then I would do around the bath and then back my way out the door. For this top coat, it takes 4 hours to dry, and they recommend that you do 3 layers of the top coat with 4 hours dry time in between in the same day. Now, it took me about an hour to roll 1 layer of the whole room. So I started early in the morning and I rolled the first layer. I let that dry for 4 hours. Then I came back in and I rolled the second layer. Then I let it dry for another 4 hours and I came back and rolled the last coat in exactly the same way. I then had to go around and just paint along the cornice because where I'd had the masking tape and I was putting that on and ripping that off, sometimes it did tear off a fair bit of the paint along the cornice. So I grabbed out my white paint, which is just Lexicon white, and I went along and I cut in very carefully along that cornice. If you're watching this video and thinking to yourself, I'd love to learn how to do some DIY projects, but I've never used any tools before, you're in luck because I've linked in the description my Women's Beginners Power Tool course, where I teach you how to use basic power tools so that you can complete your own DIY home makeovers and also learn some basic home maintenance tasks that you can complete yourself to save yourself a whole lot of money. So check it out in the description. And now let's take a look back at where we started and have a look at how the bathroom turned out.
I've finally finished this micro cement bathroom and I absolutely love how it turned out. It was a little bit longer and more drawn out of a process than I initially thought it was going to be because I did have to wait 1 day in between each coat. So in the end, it did actually take me 8 days to complete the entire bathroom makeover, but I really love how the product has turned out. It's super smooth and easy to maintain because there's no grout lines that you're going to have to continuously clean that are going to get dirty. So I do really love the practicality of the product. I also really love the look and feel of it. It is very unique and it's totally different to what tiles turn out like in terms of how the overall bathroom feels. The color is really nice because we're at a coastal location and the color really makes it feel like sand and it's really kind of Mediterranean beachy vibe. So I really do love how the product has turned out in this space. Everything else also really helped to bring the bathroom together. So it's got a beautiful timber vanity and the timber is just bringing a little bit of warmth to the space because it really did need a little bit of a pop because the whole room is the same color. So we've got a little bit of timber here and then we've got the rose gold fittings everywhere. So the tapware is all the same, the handles are the same, the bath tapware and also in the shower, it's all matching. We did go with a semi-frameless shower screen because it gives us that really sophisticated luxe vibe in this space and I really like how that blends in so nicely with the micro cement.
So I really hope you have enjoyed me sharing the process of how to micro cement a bathroom. And I think it's a really great product for somebody who doesn't want to rip out their tiles and can just go straight over the top of those old tiles. If you do a micro cement bathroom, be sure to share it with me because I would love to see how some different spaces turn out with this product. All of the product information is linked in the description if you want to get some for yourself and have a go at doing a micro cement bathroom or kitchen splashback. And of course, if you liked this video, make sure you hit subscribe and leave me a comment to give me a little bit of engagement on this video so that I can continue to bring you really awesome DIY home transformations. I'll see you in the next video.